A young child, thrust into growing up suddenly, in the story of loss, sorrow and heartbreak, with death, deception and deceit around every corner. A boy becomes a hero, but at a devastating cost. This is not the synopsis of a medieval fantasy, nor is it the plot point of a fantasy novel, but rather the storyline of a video game that has been forever etched into the history books as a pioneering title. This is not Game of Thrones, but rather the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And today, I'm going to be explaining why the game is not as simple as it seems, and why the hero of time may not be saving Hyrule to stop evil, but rather why he may have saved his country in spite of his own childhood trauma. So go grab yourself a snack and a drink, and settle in for a not so cozy story about a boy who lost everything apart from the ability to give this video a great big thumbs up. And remember, it's dangerous to go alone, but you don't have to. You can subscribe to this channel and we'll make our journey together. Not many Zelda games go through Link's history, and generally start us at a point in time where Link is an unassuming character, who then grows into being the hero as more time and danger lapses. But Ocarina is built differently in terms of Link's backstory. As we are told by the Deku Sprout after finishing the Forest Temple, Link was not a Kokiri, like he'd been led to believe for what he thought for the first 10 years of his life. He had been lied to, deceived by the Elder of the Forest, the Great Deku Tree, a deity that resides in the forest in order to protect the children under his gaze. Of course, it is revealed that the Deku Tree is incapable of telling a shred of truth throughout the game, as in the end credits the Kokiri find that they can indeed leave the forest, and they don't die as per the Deku Tree's warnings. This version of the truth keeps Link inside of the confines of the Kokiri forest, whilst also hiding him from his true identity, or heritage. The Deku Sprout reveals to us that Link is indeed Hylian, and that his mother had delivered him to the forest to be under the protection of the Deku Tree during the Hyrulean Civil War, meaning that not only the forest deity had lied to him for his entire life so far, but his longtime bully, Mido, had in fact been correct all along. Mido is known for being an obstinate obstruction. He refuses to believe Link is one of the Kokiri, labelling him as Mr. No Fairy, a wimp, and in Mido's eyes, Link is clearly beneath him, and likely the rest of the Kokiri, as he is different, having grown up with no fairy to protect him. The fairies are seen by the Kokiri as a defining factor as to what makes them. Each Kokiri is born with a fairy to guide them through their life in the forest. Should they get lost in the woods, the fairy will guide them back to the light of the forest. Should they seek assistance from the Great Deku Tree, their fairy will be the communication line back to the sentient tree. Without this fairy, a child will get lost in the woods and turn into an abomination, and will cease to be able to communicate with the giant tree, their forest guardian. Mido discriminates against Link, picking up on something that makes him different and causes Link a childhood of bullying for being different. As a result, Link barely ventures outside of his house. He stays asleep where even his dreams haunt him. His dreams where dark clouds roll in, and a man from the desert rides out on a jet black horse, raises his hand, and he's jolted awake. But this time not by the shrill shouting of his only friend in the world, Saria, another forest dweller who Mido seems to be in love with, but rather by the fluttering of tiny wings and a small but mighty voice that rings out in his head. Even she, at first his sidekick-to-be, is against the idea of working with such a lazy boy, almost as if she's resigned to the fate of working with him. She tells him to get up, get out of bed and head out to see the forest's protector, mocking him in the process as he does so. As he leaves his home, some of the forest children are genuinely nice to him. They give him hints and tips as to how he can use his newfound fairy friend, but a lot of this seems to come from a place of shock, and him having left his house to begin with. There is almost an excitement surrounding the forest children as Link joins them for what seems to be the first time in an age. from everyone except Mido. Mido instead stands guard at the entranceway to the Deku Tree and refuses Link access in to see the tree unless he has both a sword and a shield. A shield is, of course, easily obtained by purchasing it from the shop, but the blade is different. The young people within the forest had been kept separate from dangerous items, and only one legendary blade amongst the Kokiri remained, hidden away behind the small passageway that someone could only climb through, and of course a boulder that has been magically set in place in order to protect the blade at all costs. Even on your retrieval of the blade, Mido stands mocking Link. He is dumbstruck, amazed that this child with absolutely no combat training had managed to obtain both a sword and shield, and in fact here shows his true colours as he throws a tantrum, questioning why Link has suddenly become everyone's favourite. The issue here is that Link had in fact not become the favourite of everyone that Mido wished to curry favour from, and he had rather become a victim that Saria wanted to root for. As Link finishes clearing the spiders from the inside of the Deku Tree, first having to enter into the maw of a living deity, something that could be daunting or even terrifying for most people, Link is then informed that a wicked man from the desert caused the damage that had already been done, and that Link was, while heroic, too late. And the Deku Tree knew this before Link even set foot inside of him. Imagine for a second, being a 10-year-old outcast who one day wakes up to finally be like everyone else, only to be told that you're different to everyone after all, when all you wanted to be was the same as everyone, but instead you have to go fight a gigantic spider on the inside of a talking tree god, only then to be told it was for nothing, and was in effect a test. As an adult, it would annoy you, but as a child, this sort of thing would be absolutely scarring. As Link then goes to leave the forest, he's confronted by Saria, who in turn says goodbye to him. At this stage in time, this is a small point that will evolve into something much bigger later on, so hold this into your head as we head off to the castle, where he sneaks past an entire castle's worth of guards, only then to be thrust into the adventure of a lifetime by the princess of the land. Do as she says, or you could find yourself in prison for treason. But if you do, then your life will be forfeit anyway. Zelda here puts Link into a catch-22 situation, in which Link decides the adventure is the path for him. He then heads back to see Saria one last time, and the two share a moment in the woods, in which he is very capable now of getting lost within. The twisting, turning branches and tree trunk openings lead him down roots of bushes, spitting nuts at him, and other children requesting masks from him. He finally makes his way through the forest and into the sacred forest meadow, where Saria sits, waiting for him, ready to say her final goodbye. The two of them don't realise it yet, but in 7 years' time Saria will no longer be able to walk the lands of Hyrule again. After all, she will form an exclusive group of 7, who are entrusted with returning the lands back to their former glory. As Link continues on, he makes more friendships and acquaintances through his hardships and troubles. He travels to Death Mountain and meets Darunia, who tells us that he will only part with the Goron Ruby if Link can provide them with their favourite food again, the rocks of Dodongo's cavern. In order to do so, he has to face the prehistoric terror King Dodongo, who attempts to set the hero on fire, and then bash him into a lava pit in the centre of the stage. He is transported from the cavern, and Darunia declares him a sworn brother. While Link doesn't understand what this means, he understands that it symbolises a closeness with the Goron, something again that will come into effect later on in the game. The same can be said for the Zora also, as Link must save Princess Ruto by entering into the body of yet another deity, Lord Jabu Jabu. This is a very loose play on the idea of Jonah and the whale, a story told within the Bible. Within this story, Jonah is swallowed by a whale after defying an act of God. He learns to grow comfortable within said whale, until 3 days later it expels Jonah from his body, signifying Jonah's penance as having been complete. In this rendition though, the Zora have failed to give over the Zora Sapphire. The princess therefore is treated as Jonah, and the whale, in this instance Jabu Jabu, has been made sick via the use of electric jellyfish. During the ending of this dungeon, Princess Ruto offers up the sapphire as an engagement ring for the man that she will one day fall in love with, marking the third of our friendships that Link will lose as he becomes older, leading to his traumatic breakthrough. So here's the part where we'd normally continue chronologically and deal with Link's loss of his childhood, and that is coming. But as we go through the game, there are a few sections that require us to go back in time to Link's childhood, meaning that technically, the events at the bottom of the well and the Spirit Temple's first section happen before anything happens with Link as an adult. So we begin at the well. No, actually, we need to introduce one more character that will serve as a beginning point for all of Link's grief within his adulthood. Before we get to the Zora, and even the Goron, we get to the graveyard. This place isn't necessary to visit at this stage in the game, but there is a very important character here for the game progression. This guy, the gravedigger Dampé. Dampé is the caregiver of the graveyard, and offers you an opportunity to dig up the graves for a potential cash or life-enriching prize. He is a friendly soul, someone who has seemed to have grown comfortable in his own isolation, perhaps due to the fact that he's been alone in the graveyard for such a long time. He also has a slight obsessive personality disorder, judging by his diary when you sneak into his house while he is awake in the graveyard. He talks of a treasure that he has found, a stretching, sinking keepsake that he will never give away, almost like Gollum with the One Ring of Power. Precious. We meet Dampé here, and that is literally all we need to say on the matter until later on, but there will be a relevant follow-up. Slightly later into Link's childhood, he plays a song to the windmill owner that, unbeknownst to him, will set off an entire timeline paradox, and the well drains for him to climb and crawl into. This place is designed to be absolutely unsettling. It's dark, dank and dreary. Water floods some parts of it. Skeletons of those that got lost down here before sit in corners of the rooms, as if this well's victims simply waited for death down here. Spiders hang from the ceilings. Torture devices lay dormant, pools of dried blood underneath. As an adult, this place would be creepy, something nightmares are made of. But as a child, we embellish everything around us because everything around us just feels so much bigger. In the eyes of a child, these halls are no longer wet, they're flooded. The skeletons, even to a child that has seen death, are terrifying. And these walls that literally speak to you, this place is a literal nightmare. Never mind how you feel when you traverse it as a grown adult playing a video game. Imagine this through the eyes of a 10-year-old, and now imagine experiencing it all firsthand. This would have been enough to set off a mental condition of some form, but it just seems to get worse as you go on. Link finally reaches the end of the maze that is the well. It's seemingly having taken forever based on his small footprints and large space to cover. He opens the final metal door and it slams shut behind him, before this absolute abomination bursts from the ground as one of its tentacled arms grabs you from underneath. This is single-handedly the scariest thing within Ocarina of Time, and it's staring you in the face while holding your head in a direction that forces you to stare at it, and its blood-soaked skin, and those teeth. A little history lesson though. In 1996, 2 years before the release of Ocarina of Time, a series of games began in Japan known as Biohazard, centered around what would happen if the human race suddenly became zombie-like creatures. The game was a huge success, becoming a top seller globally. Horror was officially in, and games as a result moved to being more horrific as a notion to benefit from said sales. Nintendo though, they never bothered so much with horror. Bright, colourful and family friendly was always the go-to design aesthetic for Nintendo's games. So imagine the surprise when Zelda Ocarina of Time suddenly became, for a brief snapshot in time, filled with suspense, unease and blood. It was a complete juxtaposition to the rest of the game, and even arguably the rest of Nintendo's own developed back catalogue of games. Now, I want to disclaim that I'm not stating here that the bottom of the well was a knee-jerk reaction to horror games becoming a popular genre, but I do believe that the well was pared back considerably in terms of the unsettling feeling that it gives, due to several reasons. One would have been that Nintendo did not want the game rating to rise. Shockingly, despite this and an actual torture chamber being depicted in the game, it was still rated an E for everyone in the US. But my personal belief here is that the horror inside of the well is actually pared back because of this one horrific creature. But by this point in the game, we've already reached the point of no return. We've already finished the hardest dungeon in the game. We've invested time. The gambler's fallacy comes into play and we continue on. This well isn't that bad, right? Then you open the door and this thing pops up from nowhere and smiles its horrifically sadistic smile at you, and this causes trauma. The almost jump scare out of nowhere, the fact that Dead Hand is such a horrible design of a creature, the fact that you have nowhere to go, your one exit is locked. This thing can go underground, and in order to get it to come back up from underground, you have to get caught by one of its zombie arms. Horror at its finest, and trauma at its worst. If I were a child on an adventure at this point, I would have backed myself into a corner and started to cry. It doesn't remain horrific, luckily, for Child Link, but he does have one final adventure that could cause him trauma of a whole nother kind within the Spirit Temple. The Spirit Temple is a place of worship for the Gerudo. They keep it safe from invasion via giant gates that only certain gatekeepers can open. A magical sandstorm stops all visitors from entering, and if both of these precautions fail, then the lands around the temple themselves are ripe with danger, with enemies rising from the sands looking to cut apart anyone who dares enter. As an adult, this temple is relatively harrowing. It's dark and depressive, giving the feeling that any wrong move could cause the whole building to collapse around you. And as an adult, it's completely inaccessible past the first room. In order to be able to traverse this temple, a smaller stature will be required to fit through this hole first, to be able to get the item that is required to move this stone block. Link, with his own prowess over the Master Sword and his own movement through time, therefore inflicts one last piece of trauma upon himself in order to save Hyrule. He goes back in time and faces off against the worst that the Spirit Temple has to offer. In his time within the Spirit Temple, he faces quite possibly the hardest challenge of his young life. A series of hallways and rooms completely filled with enemies. With every single puzzle he needs to solve, he is ambushed first by creatures looking to kill him, but by now, this is standard fare, and when something happens more often, the effects of trauma are generally lessened. So Link here has likely got over the standard effects of a creature trying to kill him. They're just like, to the player, more of an annoyance, more than anything by this stage in the game. Luckily for the young lad, his part to play in this dungeon is relatively minimal. However, one key event does happen that could cause trauma deep enough to affect Link into the future, and it all begins right at the very beginning of this dungeon, with this character here, Naboru. Naboru is a bit of an out of left field character in Ocarina. She doesn't seem to exist prior to the Spirit Temple, and is the Sage of Spirits. Unlike the rest of the sages who have all had a long-standing relationship with Link, such as the Ruiner of the Gorons who swore brotherhood to Link, or Ruto of the Zora who proposed, Naboru and Link have no past to talk of. They are not connected in any way aside from this very brief conversation, but it's clear that from this conversation that even if it belongs in a world where the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that Naboru is going to end up being an important part of Link's growth as a person. And that's a big part of why these people, this clandestine group of misfits, are brought together to be the saviours of Hyrule, all of them making up a large part of what makes Link the person that he is by the time that he reaches the end of the game. Their loss equates to his growth as a character, almost entirely. He meets Naboru, who promises that she is against Ganondorf, and she begs him to go into the temple and get the gauntlets that can lift the heavy stones, before dropping the hint to us that only an adult can wear them. So we do so, and continue on through a handful of rooms, before coming to this gigantic staircase. Once again, everything feels a lot bigger through the eyes of young Link, as he makes his way to the top of what feels like a never-ending set of stairs. Upon opening the lock of the door, it slides open and more red carpet lay beneath his feet, in what is the complete opposite to the rest of the dungeon so far. If the rest of the Spirit Temple has felt like a sand-filled tomb for those who have become too lost to turn back, these rooms feel almost regal. Like anyone reaching these areas should await a royal audience. But rather than a king or queen sat on the throne, we see this hulking set of armour with a gigantic battle axe. You take a few steps forward, your heart racing, as for the first time you approach it, and it springs to life and immediately tries to kill you where you stand. This behemoth is so powerful that it can destroy the very supporting pillars of the temple within one hit. But you're smaller and more agile, so you dart around him, moving quickly when he launches an attack at you, and making him lodge his axe into the floor, where you can then take your knife and slip in a few attacks. Finally, the armour falls off, and he falls to the floor, allowing you outside to get your hands on the silver gauntlets, only for Link to see, from too far away for him to do anything about it, Noboru be kidnapped by Kurume and Kotake's black magic, dragged beneath the sand, to never be seen again, or at least we think. In Link's short time alive so far, he's been called upon by a giant tree only for it to die in front of him. He's been bullied by Mido, nearly set on fire by a creature that should have been extinct, been swallowed by a whale, nearly killed by this abomination, and now even those who come into contact with him for a short period of time have been kidnapped or taken from him. All of this likely has a snowball effect of grief and trauma, and I wish that that was it for Link. I wish that now he could say he became an adult and overcame all of his trauma, but that's just not the case. For him now, it's about to get so much worse. And we say that Ocarina of Time isn't that dark. This game is sent to test the hero, and the person playing it through his eyes. Let's continue on, with Link heading from Zora's domain to the Temple of Time, where he aims to open the Door of Time in order to stop Ganondorf. It should be no surprise at this point that the story that I am weaving for Ocarina of Time is not the one of a hero coming through adversity to defeat the grand evil of the planet, but rather one of loss fueling a fire that causes a violence within the hero, one that leads to a final moment so violent that it almost seems unfitting for someone of heroic stature. As we've already seen though, Link has been deceived surrounding his family situation, lied to about the curse of the forest, and has already started to lose those that are close to him, despite friendships that are starting to form with some of the tribal leaders. But the singular biggest loss to Link is what comes from the moment that he opens the Door of Time. Link, having been informed that this is the only way to stop the evil, plays the Song of Time, and the gemstones within his bag automatically fill themselves into the slots on the Door of Time's gateway barrier, before Link is then allowed to move into the chamber where he can finally pull the Sword of Time from its pedestal. However, nothing quite goes to plan, and Link is deemed as too weak, too small, just too young to wield the sword and the Triforce. As such, the Master Sword remains sealed alongside Link, who now enters his own sealed state, while the Triforce remains up for grabs for the next person who could possibly know that it existed, and that the Door of Time was open. Cue Ganondorf. Ganondorf swoops in, attempting to take the whole Triforce, but is stopped by the rules of the gods, which state that should someone with impurity touch the Triforce, then it should break into three, with the part that most symbolises the person that touches it going to that person, whilst the other two parts of the Triforce find hosts that most symbolise them also. In this instance, Ganondorf is granted the power of power, which is enough, with the Triforce of both wisdom and courage being missing from the lands, to take over the entirety of the country, as per his will. Link wakes up to face something that we all fear on a deep psychological level, the passage of time. While it's inevitable for all of us, many of us don't notice it as we see ourselves grow daily, but Link fell asleep at the age of 10 and then woke up at the age of 17. His entire childhood gone, his entire life in front of him still. At least he still has his friends that he made when he was a young boy to help guide him, right? He is told at this point that the sages have gone to their respective temples in order to purge the evil from within.
One in a deep forest, one on a high mountain, one under a vast lake, one within the house of the dead, one inside a goddess of the sand.
When we look at this section in isolation, Link, who has just lost his entire youth, is informed that he needs to revisit the last lands that he remembered having visited, to relive that trauma once again, to overcome it, and grow in spite of it. It is at this point in the game that we would, and probably should, expect a reversal of fortunes as such. Having faced enough for any child to struggle with for the rest of his life, adult Link's story should be one of redemption. One where now he succeeds in rescuing the friends he made along the way. One where his righteousness prevails and he becomes the hero. And in some part, this is the exact story of the second half of this game, but not all of the story. And it's from the very beginning that waves of both trauma and relief would hit for Link. For instance, stepping out into Hyrule's castle town for the first time to find every building demolished, and its people replaced by the undead, would have been terrifying. Imagine being gone from your homeland for 7 years, this town having been so full of colour and life, people dancing in the town square, puppies playing in the streets, and shops that rent out items that are literally designed to give people a smile, transformed into a grotesque, broken down and abandoned town, populated by nothing but distorted, groaning and shrieking husks of what was once. Imagine the thoughts that would race through your head.
Is this what's left of the town?
Is this what's left of everyone else?
What happened?
Who did this?
How did it happen?
Did everyone
die?
die?
These exact thoughts, as the player, go through your head the first time you played this sequence through. And as a character, you can only imagine that this is what Link is thinking as he comes down the stairs from the Temple of Time and finds his world broken and destroyed. So he goes to the next most friendly place in the game, Kakariko Village. And the relief kicks in as he realises that most of his old acquaintances have made it out of the town safe. Many of them now reside within Kakariko, but where previously they had bustling shops and a lifeblood that screamed energy as you entered into the castle town, now they are all much more subdued. They live now overpopulated, but with less money. It only takes a look into this house where Talon is currently sleeping to realise that there are 3 grown adults now living in this tiny house. Every person in this village, perhaps save for the weirdo who lives in the windmill, is now stretched to their very limits. You can almost sense the desperation in the item buyer's tone that wasn't there before. Almost like as a child he was asking you to sell an item with C, but now he's actually begging. These people have all lost their homes, their businesses, everything, and have nothing left to show for the lives that they've lived. Everything they worked for has been destroyed, and in some ways that fate of beginning over again, especially for some of these characters at a slightly older age, may be worse than if Ganondorf had just ended their life right there. Travelling through the village, he heads to the graveyard, after hearing hints about an item that can help him reach an area in the forest that he does not currently have access to. There is no clear-cut sign of where to go here though, and so Link scans around the graveyard for something. Anything different. This gravestone, I'm sure it had no flowers growing in front of it last time. He grabs the stone and pulls it toward him, revealing a hole in the floor. This, unfortunately for Link, as an adult, is where his trauma begins again. Earlier on, I mentioned that Link visited the graveyard to play the digging game with Dampé, but down this hole is the grave, where the spirit of his friend from the graveyard rests. Or not, lingering around this world as if he's stuck in purgatory. He can't move on until he's seen that his precious item is in good hands. He races you around a course in the crypts, in what must be a very confusing moment for Link. Link is, of course, acquainted with Dampé, and therefore should be sad to learn of his passing, but at the same time, a foot race with a ghost sounds like it could be something interesting. And at the same time as that, this ghost is actively trying to kill him, setting flame traps down periodically. That's not to mention the fact that this ghost also contains space and time altering powers, judging by the fact that if you get trapped behind Dampé and one of the stone doors that you're timed through to get through this race, you'll simply respawn right at the beginning again, effectively rewinding time to a point where that race, well, just never happened. That could of course be more to do with the grave than to do with the race itself. But it's clear that there are time blocks here at the very end as well, which without knowing the Song of Time and having the Ocarina of Time, Link would not be able to remove, meaning that he would be stuck in this grave forever. Atop of that is one final area, where Link visited when he was younger, Lon Lon Ranch. A place of peace and solitude where he could go and pet ponies and sing duets with his friend Malon. When he visits here though, again, much has changed, with Ingo having taken control of the stables, having forced Talon out and forcing Malon to work for him for free. Even the music has changed in the background here. It's slower, distorted and slightly darker than the original version, showing us that this is not so happy-go-lucky location, and that another part of Link's childhood has been utterly destroyed. And so Link travels on, back to where his childhood truly began, inside of the Kokiri forest. As he enters into the heart of the area that he grew up in, he is met with snapping jaws from a creature that towers over him. Even the most basic of enemies now has grown into an absolute colossus. But this, as Link is still used to killing monsters, would not have done any long-lasting psychological damage, not enough to fuel him through his adventures to come. However, what comes next most certainly would have. Link finds the area within the sacred forest meadow that he and Saria had once sung together in. Overcoming the behemoths in the forest first, he finds nothing but a lone tree and an entryway to another area that he has never seen before. An abandoned old mansion in the woods. This area itself doesn't do much to aid Link's trauma, and is built more like something out of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. A mansion, huge in stature, with twisting corridors and switches that untwist the mansion in full perpetuity. Hands that seek to grab Link from the ceiling if he lingers too long. Paintings of ghosts that come back to life when shot with arrows. And there's even a section in this place where the ceiling tries to fall on Link. This place is nightmare fuel, only added to by the fact that Link spends his entire time in here searching for his friend, just to come up short, and still have to face a rendition of the Headless Horseman trying to beat him to death. All of that, and Saria finally reveals herself inside the Chamber of the Sages and informs Link that
it's destiny that you and I can't live in the same world.
Link realises, one by one, that the friends he made along the way will never be able to return back to the lands of Hyrule. They are bound by what makes them sages. To the sacred realm and the Chamber of the Sages. They are forever stuck. And Link, even though one by one he attempts to rescue all of them, each and every one of them, Saria, Darunia, Ruto, Impa and Naboru, all important characters to his development as a child, are all unable to return to the planet. Many, myself included, have taken this to mean that these characters pass away during their time in the dungeon. It's not necessarily agreed upon 100% across the fandom, but whether death is involved or not, it's almost irrelevant, as just like in death, these people can never return back to their homeworld within a physical body. They can and do appear and alter events as a spirit. The Rainbow Bridge at the end of the game and the party sequence within the credits, where the world is returned back to normal, are examples of this. But whether alive or dead, these people, no, these friends of the hero, are taken from him. And for each one that he tries to rescue, he just seems to be fractionally too late. Upon leaving the Forest Temple, he's given the jump scare of his life as the new life of the Great Deku Tree sprouts from the floor. This shoot, as it stands, seems to keep all of the worldly knowledge from the original Tree of Wisdom, including knowledge about Link that will surely add more fuel to the trauma fire. It is here that Link is informed that he is not actually in fact a Kokiri at all, like he was led to believe. He is a Hylian, brought into the forest by a mother attempting to flee from an ongoing war. The Deku Tree has in fact lied to him about his entire identity. Upon hearing his entire life had been a lie to this point, he heads towards a place that should bring him joy, seeing his sworn brother, or whatever that means, dancing again to the tunes of the forest would surely quell his heavy heart. And it would just so happen that that was his next destination anyway. And so he heads up the mountain and down into the crater that forms Goron City to find not just Darunia, but his entire group gone, with only one remnant, someone that Link had never met before, a young, rolling rock named Link. In what is a brief snapshot of hope, Link tells us that his dad is still alive and has gone into the crater to stop a dragon. He gives us a red tunic and asks for our help. But stop back and look at the bleakness created by Ganondorf in this situation. The hope instilled that Darunia believes in Link so much that he's turned him into a story of legend, and that he's named his only son after the hero is immediately offset by the fact that this Goron is left alone. A small child, incapable of doing anything but curling into a ball and rolling away from danger. We get into the Fire Temple, and in every dungeon, with every trial comes something that could deter our hero, that could call his courage into question and force him down into further holes of trauma. But one stands out more than any other, so forgive me as I skip the rolling boulders and the false door fronts of the Fire Temple and move straight into the singular biggest proof point that this game has to offer us, regarding the fact that this is a game with a deeper meaning than once was considered when it first launched. And that is one text box.
Conquer yourself.
Under Lake Hylia lays an underwater labyrinth made of water height changes and keys so well hidden away that even the most experienced of adventurers struggle to find them. You enter into its halls in the hope of solving the mystery of Zora's domain, an area once filled to the brim with life, which is now frozen over, the inhabitants of the aquatic race trapped under the ice. Link travels first to the source of the ice, the caverns that sit at the back of Zora's fountain, to be told by Sheik that the issue stems more from the temple under the lake, and that Princess Ruto has gone to investigate. So naturally, Link weighs himself down with boots resoled with iron and ventures into the water temple. The water temple, as mentioned earlier, is a labyrinth of sorts. After removing the iron boots allowing you to float to the surface, you're met with a central pillar, and then rooms in each of the cardinal directions. The one we want is here, marked with 2 unlit pillars. As Link heads through here, he meets with a woman who fell for him during his childhood, the future queen of the Zora race, Princess Ruto. She swims off in a huff, and by the time you've watched her swim away, she's gone, forever. Again, everyone that Link has ever loved, or knew, or was even associated with at this point, seems to go missing. If the theory that the sages died is indeed correct, shout out to Zeltic, then the trauma only deepens. In either capacity, Link's closest compatriots have seemingly all gone missing, and there is nothing he can do about it. Each one he feels he has gotten close to eventually disappears. Such is the way of the hero, it would seem, a life of trauma and guilt for all of his troubles. As we start to unfold the secrets of the underwater labyrinth, we encounter a strange room. In a temple that's so far been closed in, tight and twisting with variable water levels, this room is a complete contradiction. It is wide, open and expansive. The water here is shallow, no more than a puddle in depth, though it is spread across the entirety of the room. The only thing actually in this room is one lone tree on a small spit of land, and it feels like you can walk over this with little effort at all. There's only a few steps involved at a maximum. This room is eerie, and nothing else but this dead tree lay inside. It all feels out of place, like something is wrong. It's almost uncanny, but still we push on through this odd room, through to the other side where there lay a building with a barred door. There is no option then but to turn back, go back the way you came, and oh, what's that? As you reapproach the tree from the other side, something begins to come into focus. A silhouette of something. Something that you can only make out once you are within touching distance. You. Your own shadow stands at the base of the tree. And before you even have a chance to think, to comprehend what's going on, the figure rushes forward, readying his shield. He doesn't attack though. Not until you attack him, but when you do, he mirrors your every move. Even in instances of you attempting to lunge forward, he jumps on your blade, making it impossible for you to move. And the pièce de résistance? When you ask your companion how to fight this version of you, she answers back with just 2 incredibly unhelpful words.
Conquer yourself.
There are a handful of ways that you can do what the game wants you to do in conquering yourself. The basic idea though is that Link needs to use items that he has collected throughout his adventure. The things that have defined his story in order to defeat himself. This Shadow of Link is based on the Link that first gets trapped within the Sacred Realm. He has a sword, a shield and incredible reactions. He's a true fighter, as it will. This is how the world sees Link. A master swordsman by this point. And it shows. Whenever Link strikes with his sword, Dark Link parries. Their swords clashing, or the sound of steel against a metal shield reverberates. Should Link attempt to use his hookshot or his bow, he will find his arrows or the metal point of the spring-loaded contraption bouncing off of Dark Link's replication of the Hylian shield. But should you use fire, in the form of Din's fire, you will find yourself able to hurt yourself, effectively burning away the byproduct of trauma caused over years. Should you use a weapon that this imposter does not have, such as the Megaton Hammer, he will be unable to counter you. These items are, in essence, what make the grief worthwhile. These items remind Link not just of his adventure, but of the hardships he overcame to obtain them, whether that be the destruction of the ghosts of witches within the Forest Temple, or the winning of a race against an undead acquaintance, or even perhaps the navigation of a flaming labyrinth, complete with Indiana Jones styled giant boulders. All of these trials and tribulations lead to this point, where Link must not only just defeat himself, but the manifestation of his grief and trauma to this point. He has lost every single friend he has ever known. He has undergone the worst of all trials, all set up to test his mental and physical fortitude, and now he must literally defeat his own reflection. If none of this was bad enough though, he next ventures into an area that would traumatise even the best of us. I remember personally my first time playing the Shadow Temple, and how the first few rooms felt for me like a setup to a completely different dungeon. Before we get into the meat and bones of the dungeon though, we need to discuss this second battle with Dead Hand. He reappears almost from nowhere, but this fight feels like the changing of the winds as it were for Link. As a youngster he fought Dead Hand before and it was terrifying. The creature towers over you, making you feel dwarfed, especially when your only real weapon is a knife. The whole fight when you're a child feels overwhelming, and seeing this thing amble towards you when you're held in place by his arms that protrude from the floor is genuinely like something out of a horror movie. But as an adult, this fight feels different. Link, as a child, sees Dead Hand as a terrifying mass of a creature, and you as the player feel the same. There's something truly horrific here. But in reality, as an adult, we are better equipped and larger. Dead Hand is still larger than us, but he nowhere near cuts the same imposing figure that he did when you were small. The hands that grip you in place feel weaker, as we're in a stronger fighting position now that we hold the Master Sword. And on the overall, this fight is a lot simpler once we're an adult. This is by design, I feel. If they wanted to, they could have power crept Dead Hand at this point, giving him more health and more methods of attack. But instead of doing so, they kept this boss exactly the same, and in many ways it's symbolic of Link's growth. Not just as a swordsman, but his mental conditioning. The mental growth he has as he ventures through each and every dungeon, losing each and every friend he's made, and battling his own anxieties. It's all made him a stronger person. This fight against Dead Hand seems irrelevant at first, just a filler to get the hover boots, but serves a much deeper meaning, of Link now being able to directly face his fears and fear no man, creature or abomination. This continues on through the Spirit Temple, this growth as once again Link faces off against an opponent who is much bigger, stronger and certain to cause death than he is. As a child, he nearly died against one of these apparently mind-controlled guards, but here he is again, better equipped and more adept to deal with these after having overcome his fear and faced his trauma throughout the course of the game. However, there is one final microcosm of trauma left for Link as he squares off against this guard, now bent to the will of the Gerudo Witches. But this particular experience doesn't scar or maim, rather it fuels the fire for the final battle. After all, you meet Naboru, the Gerudo beauty who wishes for the deposition of her clan's leader as a child. Her impact on Link's life is very, very little. She in fact puts him in direct risk the first time of meeting him, but yet she is still an acquaintance and one of the very few people in the game when Link is a child that actually actively understands your mission. Saria barely understands that Link needs to leave the forest. Darunia understands the threat of Gandalf but is more concerned with filling his stomach, and Ruto is generally unfazed by any of the events that are unfolding, wishing to be left alone inside of the stomach of Jabu Jabu until her pretty stone is found. Those that you rescue or save later on in the game, Impa and Naboru, are a little more mission critical. They are almost an indirect threat to Ganondorf, understanding and in the case of Impa, helping to even spearhead these movements against the King of Evil. These being locked away inside the Chamber of Sages, with a few of them perhaps no longer being bound to a mortal coil of sorts, becomes more of an act of war than anything on Ganondorf's part. Trapping them inside of the House of the Dead and an effigy to the Sand Goddess that his own people worship almost feels like a message being sent to Link. So when Link rips the armour from Naboru as a part of his fight from her, the idea that the people that are being rallied against Ganondorf are now doing his bidding is, well, something that at this stage only served to strengthen Link's hatred towards the big evil. There are, of course, more events in the game like the Royal Tombs as a child, where Link would face traumatic experiences. But we are now there in terms of explaining where Link's initial trauma would have come from, and how that potential trauma would begin to feed into some form of hatred or contempt for Ganondorf. But where is this all going? How does that translate into the final fight? Well, at first it doesn't seem to. Link doesn't seem to strike with malice or hatred whenever he hits a bolt back at Ganondorf during their game of Dead Man's Volley, nor does he seem to act in particular disdain when he strikes Ganondorf after he fires the light arrow at him. In fact, in reality, this battle feels structured, like two relative equals dueling for the first time in the game. But let's not forget the destruction that Ganondorf to date has wreaked upon Link's life. His family killed, in a civil war that was inferred to be started by this man. His friends, certainly kidnapped, at worst killed, by this man. His own life, seemingly being a source of entertainment for this man, with tests and numerous monsters being brought back to life in an attempt to kill the hero. This trauma that Link has experienced, it does show at one stage, and one stage only during the game. But that one part is likely the most important showing of character for adult Link within the entirety of the game, and that is the ending sequence. During this, Ganondorf has been defeated and with his magic looks to bring down the castle around both the hero and the princess. They escape, only for the husk of Ganondorf, fueled by nothing but blind rage, shows his power, rising from the ruins like a blackened phoenix, his body transforming before their very eyes into a gigantic bipedal boar with two blades. It swipes at Link, knocking the Master Sword from his hands, and then the two spar. Link with either an even bigger sword than the Master Sword, or the Megaton Hammer and this grotesque creature with its blades. The two clash, until Link sees an opening caused by the creature overcommitting to an attack. Unable to think, blinded in its own rage, he rolls between its legs and spots that its tail is glowing, the perfect weak point, which Link hacks away at, more out of an instinct to survive than of the own rage in his heart caused by every single event so far. But then the creature falls, weakened, and Zelda binds it in place for long enough to grab the Master Sword and... one would have done the job. Two is insurance. But this third strike, this is pure hatred. Link with this third shot doesn't just swipe, he plunges his blade straight into the forehead of the beast with all of his anger, all of his might, burying it until just the hilt remains. This is not the act of someone who is acting emotionally stable, just battling for survival. This is the act of someone who needed that release, who felt catharsis at being able to take these free shots at this horrendous creature who has made his life a living hell for the last 7 years. At this point, as the player, you revel and join the catharsism, breathing a sigh of relief as the controller goes down and you can enjoy the final few minutes of this game. And that mirrors the exact feeling of the hero at this point. Link won in his battle, not just against Ganon but against his own mental anguish, showing us how truly courageous he is. Because it's one thing to fight in a big battle and win, but it's another to battle against your own memories and come out in one piece. Despite having its own hardware limitations, its lack of voice lines and polygonal models, this game is a masterpiece. It can be easy to see it now and think it's outdated. While it takes some getting there and it isn't explicitly said, we could easily take the entire game to be an analogy for grief and trauma, the overcoming of traumatic events occurring, and the real courage it takes to overcome what is going on inside of your own head. It would be easy after all for the scared young child Link to refuse Navi's request at the start of the game, and little does he know that the further down the rabbit hole he goes in trying to stop Ganondorf, the more he will expose himself to the trauma that will eventually make him the hero of time. Thank you so much for watching this take on one of my favourite games of all time. I really love putting this together. So if you've got a few more seconds, go and hookshot that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It's really appreciated. And then go check out this video about putting princesses in jail for a little bit of comedic relief. Go on, you've earned it.